I'm going to now spotlight Norman and going to ask him to remove me. Thank you, Norman.
Well, good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Mould to you. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and we're looking forward to the next hour in your company. And I'll ask you a few questions and just give you an opportunity to set the scene and tell us some of the things that you've been getting up to these last, well, lots of years, really. And then after about 20 minutes, we'll throw it open for questions. And once again, to all of you, at any time, feel free to type in a question using the chat button at the bottom of the screen. So, Chris, we're going to get around to talking about your involvement with Foodbank, for which you're probably best known. But let's go back before that, and let's find out a little bit about your path, the path that led you there, because you had quite a distinguished career up to the point that you got involved with Foodbank. I'm not sure if it felt like it. Why don't you tell us what you were getting up to before that?
Yeah, I'm happy to say what I was doing. It's up to other people to say what they think of what I was doing. Yeah, I spent about 20 years in the public sector. I was working in the NHS for most of that time. And for about 12 years, I was chief executive of NHS trusts. Yeah, from soon after I'd finished doing a master's degree until 2001. Actually, 20 years ago, last month, I left the NHS. And I had a period of just 3 years, just over 3 years, working for the government to establish a new police training organisation. So managing police training for England and Wales. Involved merging 8 organisations and implementing a fairly substantial chunk of the Police Reform Act, which, yeah, was interesting because I took the job when it was a police reform bill. So it could have been it was a very short-lived job, but fortunately Parliament said yes, and then I had a job to do.
Well, it sounds pretty distinguished to me, whatever you may call it, but things start to get interesting when we look at what happened next, because I can imagine you going on to run some other national organization in government, public sector, but your career took a different turn. Why don't you fill in what happened there?
I think I need to just sort of lay the foundation. And I became a Christian as a teenager. And, you know, for me, when you choose to follow a particular path and that's it, you know, I throw myself into things. I put a lot of focus on it. Therefore, all the work that I've done was, in my view, a consequence of, you know, asking God, what do you want to do with me? Here I am, wholly available to you. I think there's an old song we used to sing. Yeah. And I used to say that and sing it and whatever. And so here I am, wholly available. At times it wasn't that easy to work out just where I was going. And then you'd get moments of clarity out of the points of periods of perplexity. And we came to the end of this police experience, being sure that I'd moved into that world by God's grace. You know, some remarkable bits of the story, which for another time, really. But it was a fixed-term contract, and I was the first person since the Second World War who was not a police officer to hold a chief constable's post. So it was an unusual thing to have. And for some fellow chief constables, it was great. Good news, shaking up the system. But for others, it was bad news. So it was Marmite, you know.
Yeah.
So the big question came at the end of the the fixed contract. Do we let him carry on, or do we go and get a police officer to do this job following? And that's what happened. They decided that really it should be back to the police officers, and probably that's sensible in the long term. So I found myself thinking, gosh, now what? And I was looking for work, and as you said, Norman, there were various possibilities of fairly substantial government jobs. And I went to see a friend of mine in the meantime, who had just founded this charity, the Trussell Trust, is Paddy Henderson, to say, Paddy, I'm looking for work and all the rest, and I'd like to do some volunteering. And you've got this Foodbank project you just started. You know, it's in a pilot stage. Can I come and drive you a van or something? Please, I don't want to get bored whilst I'm job hunting. And he said, no, you can't, because that's Richard's job. And Norman knows Richard because he's still with us, but in another field now. But you can help me with strategy. I'm desperate. And that's how I ended up in the Trussell Trust, volunteering in 2004.
But the Trussell Trust didn't really start out in the UK, did it?
No, it didn't. The Trussell Trust, it is what it is because Paddy and Carol's mother, Carol Henderson's mother, died and left a legacy. And she said, please use this money to help people who have had less of a chance in life than I have. So they set up a charity to do that. I think about £70,000 worth was left. So it's an amazing story of what you can do if you leave some of your resource for good use, you know. And they were at the time involved with Tier Fund and had been seconded into Bulgaria. So they'd been working on disaster relief.
That's an international development.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so they were involved in international development. Paddy came out of the army. He was an expert in logistics, and he'd been to places where earthquakes happened. So he was good at putting up tents and getting mass feeding programs going. And that's what he'd been doing in Bulgaria. He was feeding a large quadrant of the people in Sofia at a time when the economy had collapsed. And the UN were involved. It was in the late 90s, but that's where we were at. And they started helping poorer people in Bulgaria with this little charity.
And how did it make the jump from Bulgaria to Britain? I mean, normally things go the other way.
They do. They're energetic souls, Paddy and Carol, amazing, faithful souls. And they were raising money in the UK. And yet again, they were trying to persuade the people of Salisbury to help poor children in the streets of Sofia who were walking around without shoes in the snow and things like that. And a woman phoned up Paddy and Carol one night and swore at her and was very distressed at Paddy, very distressed and cross because they were yet again on the newspaper asking to help people in foreign countries. And she said, well, what are you going to do about poverty back here in Salisbury instead of always going after getting people to help the foreign kids? And he said, well, you know, it's not the same because we've got a welfare state. And she started crying and said, I've got 3 kids and none of them ate tonight. They've gone to bed hungry in Salisbury. And that was where the Foodbank was born, really, because their hearts were broken. They thought, this cannot be. And they went to see her that evening, took her some food, took her to Tesco's the next day and started researching the question, is it real? Do other people suffer this same kind of experience this woman had suffered? What does the social services do about it? And so on. And they built a proposition called the Foodbank. I'm happy to talk more about what the fundamentals of that are, because they're quite important.
Well, I'm sure there are, I know there are some folk connected at the moment who know all about Foodbank from the perspective of having sleeves rolled up and getting on with doing it. But for those who are not familiar with it, how does it work?
Basically, a Trussell Trust Foodbank is a project that asks local people to donate food to a central location where it's available to give out to other local people when they're in trouble. So it's the provision of short-term emergency relief for people who can't buy food because they've got a financial crisis. The crisis behind that might be something else, but the measure is they can't get any food, they need help. So it's a project that's local in its shape. And we used to say at the outset, this is a food bank. It's like a normal bank. You know, people deposit money in there and other people borrow your money and get to use it whilst you're not using it. And then you might need it, so you use theirs. And that was the idea. You buy some food when you can and give it to us. We'll look after it. We'll give it to people who need it. And one day, if you ever need it, you can have some too. That simple. And we felt that it should be led by the Christian community, because that's what we're here for, is to promote and advance the kingdom of God. I like to see the kingdom of God as, you know, a better world now. We're always striving for it. That's what we're striving for. And it's local, you know.
So you got involved right at the start as that Trussell model came from Bulgaria to Britain, and you knew Paddy, and they asked you to come in and help. What happened next?
Well, a couple of months after I started volunteering, the trustees of the Trussell Trust were having a vision day. That if you're involved in anything in the way of Christian activity and ministry, you know, I would encourage you to have vision days, but I would say warning, you know, because you never know what God might ask you to do next. And the dilemma they had was they're coming to the end of a 3-year project, which had been set up to do things in Salisbury, and we'd evaluated it, and I had given them an evaluation. I'd spent a few weeks doing some, and the basic message was, this works. And one of the questions we had asked the referring agents, health visitors and social workers and other people like that was, what will happen if we shut it? Because it shouldn't really be here because the welfare state's here. Yeah. And several departments said, you can't. And we said, what do you mean we can't? It's not yours, it's ours, you know? And they said, we've changed our working practice. It makes such a difference for people. You can't do that. And that was a very strong measure of the fact that it was working. And we asked them then, of course, well, what had it done to make your life better and different? And what about the real people that matter, your clients, your beneficiaries? So that vision day was about, what do we do? Because something like the obvious light bulb moment was this: if Salisbury, a middle-class city with about 50,000 people, and at the time we used to joke that Salisbury was well known because it was the place where there were more households with 3 cars than anywhere else in Britain. You know, it was so it's a bit like North Cheshire or something. I don't know. It isn't really, but we used to joke. So if a place like that has thousands of people who need help every year because of this awful situation of being in desperate short-term need, what's happening elsewhere in the country, and what do they do where they haven't got a food bank? And on that vision day, we were broken over that. It was such an awful thought. What on earth happens to people where there isn't a project like this? And we thought we probably knew the answer. People lose their homes. They have their families taken into care. Some of them commit crimes. They steal from shops because they're desperate to feed their toddler, and they end up with a criminal record. Others end up with mental health problems that take years to put right. And we sort of, sadly, had quite a lot of evidence because we'd done the evaluation, which meant that's what happens.
So what do you do next?
I
mean, how on earth do you?
Well, this is the
one food bank to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what it went like this. That particular day was long and very, very exciting. But first there was the morning where it's what on earth do we do? Because we think that the message we're picking up is if Salisbury needs a food bank, every town should have one. Then we said, well, how many towns are there in this country? Well, there's a lot of them. And as you say, how can you go from one project to lots? And we ended the day by saying, well, what we're going to do is to set ourselves a target of launching 50 within 5 years. And we decided to review business models for growth. How do you do it? Do you get loads of money and invest and build an organization? Or do you learn from the commercial business format franchising world where capital comes from the periphery rather than from a few rich investors or whatever? So we did that.
Chris, you're getting into management speak now.
I'm sorry. It's important though, because one of the things about charitable projects, Christian or otherwise, they really shouldn't have much life in them if they can't justify themselves in terms of being run well, making good use of donors' money, and that we should be learning from the best in business.
So what did you do?
Well, we decided we would copy a commercial business format franchise approach. So we studied it. And we spent lots of time learning how McDonald's did it, which was interesting. All the detail. And we wrote detailed manuals. And anyway, we decided that's how we would go. And we started to invite people we knew who'd shown some interest in Foodbank from churches in other parts of the country to come and walk with us, to learn with us, and to become our first Foodbank franchisees. So in that first year, we had Milton Keynes and we had Gloucester, and somewhere down the track, within 12 months, some people in Inverness said they wanted to do it as well. And you'd like to hear this, Norman.
Yeah, my hometown.
I know. And, our first
thought the opposite end of the country from
Yes,
Salisbury.
exactly. So we had this, there's a strategy problem here, because we can kind of manage an organization that's a little group of people trying this model out within traveling distance that we can reach. But when our friends in Inverness want to do it, now what do we do? And again, the outcome of praying that one through was a view that we should respond wherever people were being stirred to do it, irrespective of the distance, and that we would find a way to deal with that downstream. So Inverness, I think, was 4th food bank we launched. We didn't get into London until nearly 5 years in, and that was deliberate. We decided we would not attempt to launch in a big metropolitan environment until we knew more how to do it, because you couldn't just do one.
So I'm sure it would be wonderful to go through individual places and hear about how one was added to the next. But where does Foodbank stand now in terms of scale?
We set that target of 50.
Yeah.
We made it in 4 3/4 years.
Wonderful.
And it was very hard work. I mean, you have to picture this. I'd left this government job where I had a few thousand staff and a car that drove me around, and was working with Paddy in a shed. And we had 5 part-time colleagues, and we had to grow from there. So I had to learn a lot about doing it differently. Where do we go? 50 in just under 5 years. A couple of years later, because of the economic crisis and other things, we launched 110 food banks in 1 year, and it nearly broke us. By 2013-14, we had 1,460 outlets like the Salisbury Food Bank.
Yes.
You can say that's extraordinary management achievement, but actually it's really an incredible testimony to the get up and go mentality of Christians all across the country, because all of them were led by Christians who said, I don't like what's going on in my town. I want to do something about it. Can I work with you to do that? That's really what was going on. And they had to bear the burden afterwards because they ran the food banks. We didn't.
You've used quite a lot of Christian speak, but is it an exclusive Christian organization?
No. It's an interesting fine line, this. Let's be absolutely clear. People who need help get help. And the people who refer them, and by 2014, we had 45,000 different agencies holding vouchers, so able to refer their clients to food banks somewhere in the UK. And half of those were public sector, so police, prisons, hospitals, social services, and so on. So of course it's not exclusive, but we had a view that a Trussell Trust food bank would be a place where anybody coming in got the offer of prayer before they left. We wanted to say, look, we've given you some food and we've shown some sympathy towards you and love and care and concern and compassion. But you know, what you've told us, your story sounds awful. We'd love to pray for you. Would you mind? And we produced a little video that was how to pray for somebody in 90 seconds without using jargon and not embarrassing them. Because Christians can be really embarrassing, can't we? You know, but how to do this. And we'd experimented, and vast majority of our clients said, well, it won't hurt, will it? And you say, no, it doesn't hurt. And they'd say, okay, then you can. Because somebody at last is paying some respectful attention to them. So we were training people to pray well. For that, you have to have somebody in the leadership of the organization who can get that. So we gave the franchises.
But Trussell Trust has had an open door for volunteers who don't.
Absolutely. No, volunteer. Anybody can volunteer.
Yeah.
I mean,
because you can recognize there's a need and want to do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other very, very important thing was that we had a kind of strap line, but it was much more than that. We for years we worked around this. We were about restoring dignity and reviving hope. If you want to restore someone's dignity, they come in desperate, thinking full of shame often. And we want to be able to say to them, you know, we understand it's not your fault. And by the way, we probably need you. So would you like to help us? So we encouraged people to ask their clients as they got through the process, 3 or 4 visits and so on, to consider coming back as a volunteer and to help others like them.
Chris, we're going to move on to take questions in a moment. And I'd just like to remind everyone who's watching and listening, if you'd like to ask a question, just click that chat button at the bottom. And I can't promise to be able to ask all of the questions, but I'll do my best. While folk are doing that, Chris, can you just tell us, because I mean, here you are, you've been part of an amazing sort of rocket ride as you've gone from one local food bank to something which is truly national, but actually it's got lots of international food banks nowadays. And then you stepped away from it. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd been involved for 13 years leading it. And I suppose it's partly health. I had a few months where basically I had some open heart surgery because I discovered late in life that I was born with a bit of my heart that wasn't the right shape. It got a bit missing. You know, people say that you have a screw loose. Well, I had a bit of my heart missing, but I didn't know. So I did a lot of marathon running and other things like that. But one day, 2014, 7 years ago, I realized I wasn't so fit after all. Well, it's all fixed. I have a metallic heart valve and off we go again, you know. But it was like going to the repair shop for a bit. There was that. My wife got ill. and we had to say, well, what's this saying, and can we hand over? So partly health, that's the reality. It's a weakness issue. You know, you haven't got the same energy and strength and capacity you used to have. Secondly, it's appropriate for leaders to hand on at the right time. And we were saying, well, what is it that, what my strengths and my passion is about launching things, growing things, getting things going. And usually you will look for someone else to take on the next stage of the journey and you know, develop them for that and hand over. But I have a charity that I'm committed to now. I'm the chief executive of, which is continuing the work that Trussell Trust started in Bulgaria in the 1990s. So the Foundation for Social Change and Inclusion is what we are. And I lead that. We're working to prevent human trafficking and exploitation in Bulgaria, and actually these days right across Southeast Europe, from Albania to Moldova, working with partners. Totally consuming, very challenging, because the stories, the life stories of the people who are in poverty and consequentially exploited are often horrendous, but also amazingly uplifting, because people can go from the most desperate situation with our help and a program of change to lives restored. I'm happy to tell you a story about one of them if I have a moment, but it's up to you, Norman.
Well, I think I'm going to start. I'm going to start asking the questions that have come in, and very helpfully, someone, shall I say the names of the people? Why not? David has sent in a question, which simply says, "What next beyond food?" And it's a great question, actually, because poverty it goes much wider than food, and I think actually it sounds like you're exploring that back in Bulgaria and Central and Eastern Europe. Just before we come back to some Foodbank questions, so the organization that you're working with is called Foundation for Social Change and Inclusion, which is a bit of a mouthful. You call it FSCI usually, I think.
Yes, we do.
So how does it work?
Well, we have developed programs that enable us to engage with some of the most vulnerable people in those countries. And there are certain moments in life where you're more at risk than others. When somebody who is young and unsupported leaves care and becomes an independent adult, there's a much higher likelihood than any other point in life for them to become exploited if they are they're targets for traffickers. So we work with care agencies to help care leavers to have a transition. It's a 2-year program in a house of opportunity. We provide them somewhere safe to live, good people to hang out with, and work to do. And we teach them basic life skills. We work with very broken families in poor neighborhoods, because those that have young children are again at high risk of the cycle of poverty again. They've got no money, they're drawn into criminal activity, they're exploited. I've met people who have 5 children and they do the calculus that says, well, maybe if we sell one of them, then the others will survive, you know? And we're talking about Europe. We are talking about the most awful things going on, including in European member states, European Union member states. So this is not about, you know, the ones that never made it. This is both and. So you look for where the vulnerable points are, and you do something to get alongside and give them different options for life.
Chris, we've been talking about the work you've been involved in with people who are stuck in a poverty trap. And we've been talking about abstract words like poverty, but what does it actually look like to see somebody being helped out of a poverty crisis? And I don't mind if you talk about an experience from Foodbank or from FSCI, but just what does it mean to get alongside people and help them up and out?
Okay, I'm going to give two quick examples. One is UK food bank related and the other's Bulgaria. There's a young woman whose name is Ivila, who I often think back to. And one of the best moments in my life was when Ivila bought me a coffee in the local coffee shop and introduced me to her mother-in-law. A few years earlier, she'd come into our pilot house of opportunity at the request of her.
This is in Bulgaria.
In Bulgaria,
Yeah.
in Bulgaria, at the request of a former orphanage director who was very worried that she was about to end up in a brothel in Vienna. She was a good footballer, Ivila, and when she left her orphanage, the sort of wider clan got round her and persuaded her that they'd got a good job for her. She was going to go to Vienna to play football and be paid for it. The reality was she was about to be trafficked, and her orphanage director persuaded her to think again. So she came in as a sassy 18-year-old, bit cheeky and difficult. She got through a few years. She got a job. We got her a job with Siemens. She became a supervisor. She got married to a local lad in the place where we were running the service. She had a baby. And the thing that I want to emphasize is when Ivila buys me coffee and introduces me to her mother-in-law, and then friends of hers in her toddler group come in with their babies in the buggies, you realize that someone's gone from being excluded, high risk of being a prostitute, to included in a community that will support her through the rest of her life if she's up for it.
That's wonderful. So that's an example from Bulgaria. How about from Foodbank, closer to home?
Yeah. What it's about. I picture in my mind a food bank in the Midlands that I visited. I was always in and out of food banks, but I visited this one when the political temperature was very high, 2013. And it was a few months before I had a meeting with David Cameron, which is extraordinary, a one-to-one 40-minute meeting to talk about this peculiar issue that he didn't understand, as he put it, of food poverty and why it was so bad. Anyway, in this food bank, I was the sort of second guest. The real guest was the MP who's supposed to come and meet clients and see how it all worked, and they'd asked me to join, so I was there. Now the MP got cross during the briefing that the food bank team gave him, and instead of going to meet the people who were his constituents who were needy, he just stormed out, actually. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is bad news, because they'd got various people to come and meet the MP, volunteers, clients of the food bank and all the rest. So I went to say hello, and I met this couple with two small boys. And I said to the man, would you mind just telling me how come you ended up needing a food bank? And he said, well, I ended up here because I tried to kill myself. I tried to hang myself. And I said, my goodness, I'm so glad you weren't good at that. What happened? And his wife started to cry, and his little boys were playing toys, And he said, well, I came out of the army, I set up a business, and for a while it went well, then it went wrong. And I got depressed, and I decided that the best thing for the family is if I could get the insurance money on the life insurance. So she found him in the garage. Unfortunately, he wasn't dead. Praise God. So he got referred by, actually, it was one of the army charities, to the food bank. And, I said, well, how do you find it? And he said, well, it's just amazing. And his wife said, my boys, the dignity is back, she said. And, this is the word that matters. She said, they were so excited when they could take flapjacks in their lunchbox to school that we'd made at home. She said, this is what Food Bank is about, I could do that for them. And they were on their third visit. I said, well, what happened this time? And he said, well, we're actually trained first responders. And we wondered whether these guys would like a bit of help with that. So we've offered to do training for all the team here and the volunteers. And I asked, well, what happened? Did they say yes? I said, oh yeah. They said they'd love it. So we've got a person who not long before tried to take his life, who was now valued because he had something to give them that they didn't have, them being the other lot who'd helped him, you know? And the transformation is not difficult to imagine, is it? That's restoring somebody's dignity, giving them hope for the future, all done by that local food bank.
You told me the other day that actually you've got thousands of stories that you picked up along the way, and each one about a precious person or a precious family. You touched on politics, and I don't want to get into party politics, obviously, but Jane asks, can you see how we might move forward so that we no longer need food banks, as wonderful as they are? I mean, you've been on the coalface here and abroad. You must have pretty strong views about poverty and what needs to be done.
Yeah, well, I've been interested all my life, and this is not an exaggeration, since teenage in the interface between policy and practice. I'm actually interested in politics and policy, and that question in a society which is more than a group of people, it's a lot of people. What can you do to increase the likelihood that life will be positive and enjoyable and safe for more people than is currently the case? And I think you bring your Christian faith to it as well, and you say, well, part of that is about, you know, the spiritual dimension, but it's far more than that. It's what can we do to make life better? The question, can you envisage a time when there aren't food banks? Yes, of course I can, but I can't ever envisage a time where there won't be things going wrong in this world, this fallen, broken world, and there won't be a need for people to step up to the plate and do something about it quickly. And I hope that whatever it is that's done about it, it's efficient, effective, fair, just, and all the rest. So if you remove the food bank, you're not going to stop this side of heaven things from time to time going wrong, you know.
What do you say to people who and food banks amazingly have attracted criticism from some quarters? What do you say to the people who say, well, what food banks do is they kind of encourage people independence? I mean, they encourage people to be dependent, is what I mean.
Well, they don't, because they're designed as a temporary intervention, firstly. And secondly, they're designed, and the volunteers are trained to look to signpost people to other agencies that help them with longer term exit strategy from the problem they're in. But just takes us back to policy and to government. The period that I was involved in, we had a welfare reform, a major reform of the welfare system. We, the Trussell Trust, said when this was a proposal and not enacted, you are going to have some very major problems, and hundreds of thousands of people are going to be suffering as a consequence of what you're proposing to do. And that actually was the process that led to me meeting David Cameron. But we were saying, you can see this is not going to work properly. And by 2014, April 2014, 42% of 1 million food parcels were being given to people whose financial crisis was the consequence of benefits they were eligible for being delayed. So the system was withholding money that the citizens had the right to, and as a consequence, we were feeding them. So that's a thing where you've got to mend that. Yes. Irrespective of your party politics, you know, you've got to fix it. And it's technical, actually, partly, but it was not fundamentally technical, because it was to do with a misunderstanding, in my view, about what the social security system's for in a society. But that's, well, we'll talk about that maybe. But you know, the point is, we have to engage with politics. We have to try and make things better. They won't ever be perfect. And one of the jobs of the Christian community, in my view, is to be first to hear the voice of the wonderful, amazing creator God we worship saying, hey, you've got to do something about this. And I've got an idea, that's the thing. There's always new ideas coming up, aren't there? And that's so fantastic about the Christian community, I think.
I have a question here, which it's a nitty-gritty question, but I'm really glad that Val and Steve are asking it, because it's something I've wondered about. The question is, how does Foodbank balance supply and demand? Because the food comes in from donors, and how do you manage that?
It's not always easy, and I'm not sure how they managed it this last year, 2020, because it's been an extraordinary year with even more demand than ever. Also an extraordinary year because many food banks have been given an enormous sums of money. The public have really given deeply, dug deeply into their pockets. Anyway, how do you balance it? Well, for a start, the food bank only asks for a certain type of items, number of items, and that was scientifically developed with the work of dietitians and ourselves to say, what's the package of food that you need to be able to offer people so that they can get breakfast, lunch and tea for a family of 4 for 3 days. And it's all got to be long life, please. So we don't need a fridge and a freezer.
Yes.
So then you have to ask, and you have to keep asking people. So multiple regular food collections, you have partners in churches and schools, hundreds of schools, thousands of schools actually, where there were drop-off points for food. Then we negotiated with the supermarkets. This was 2012, 11, 12, 13, and said to them, could we have drop-off places in your stores at the exit, so that and then can we remind people as they go in, just why buy one extra item on your shopping, add an item. So you remember the drop-off points in Tesco's, and then they appeared in Waitrose, and we got them into Asda and Co-op and so on. So you have to have in people's face a bit reminder that they can do their bit to help.
I saw an article in The Guardian that was bashing Foodbank because it said that the main winner here is the supermarkets, not because of the collection points, but because big business was dumping food that it hadn't used. And the argument was that, so really what you're doing is providing a waste service to big business, but actually I couldn't see that anyone loses there.
Well, firstly, no one need lose, and secondly, that's not the food bank model. That's more likely fair share. And this is the thing: people have it's become it's become part of our lexicon, and it's misused sometimes. It is really good to shift surplus food to places where people can make use of it and enjoy it. The food bank isn't about shifting surplus food. It's about asking the community to give their neighbours in trouble the sort of thing they'd like themselves for breakfast. And that means please buy something from my shopping list, the charity shopping list, milk, cereal, sliced bread, these sorts of things. So it's actually saying buy things, not. Yeah, just give you an example. I went to a hostel in Gloucester once, early on in about 2005, and was chatting to people living there. And one of the guys said to me, oh, they had some nice cakes there. See, this is the thing, it was tea time. And I said, oh, that looks nice, that's great. And would you like one? Yes, please. And I ate this cake, cream in it. And he said, do you know what it's like to have to eat this stuff every day, all the time, because Marks and Spencer's can't shift it. And so they hand it on here. And that's what we get. And then sometimes we get salmon sandwiches. It's like we have to eat what they don't sell, rather than we can have it's the dignity issue.
Yes. So
food waste, move it, use intermediaries like charities to cook it and get creative with it. it's not the main part of what Foodbank is about.
So Foodbank may not be your day job anymore, but
No.
I know you know the answer to this. What would you say to someone who was wanting to get involved, either for the first time or maybe to get more involved?
Contact your local food bank, chat to the manager and say, how can I help? There are volunteers, there's all sorts of roles. Should be plenty of flexibility about what's possible, short, a shift here and there through to regularly leading a team once a week or whatever.
And if anyone is watching and doesn't know how to contact the food bank, then
go to the website and there's a map, and you can look on the map, the Trussell Trust interactive map, and you can find the nearest food bank to you, and you can find the contact details.
And also the churches that were mentioned at the start are involved locally, people in the churches. And, which brings me to Rebecca's question. Is Christianity still at the heart of Foodbank, or has it become more of a secular charity as it's grown?
That's a really complicated question for me to answer, because I'm not involved in the board or the leadership anymore. I can talk about my experience up till December 2017, and to say the organization, the Trussell Trust, was never registered as an organization that was there to promote the Christian faith. It was there to relieve poverty. And it's important to say that, because our purpose was to relieve poverty. And we had a way of doing it which involved using talent and tools. And we were experts at working with the Christian community in the UK, right across all denominations, to galvanize them, to galvanize their communities. So I don't know whether it's become less or more. I think you have to say, well, how many churches were involved? And I used to count, 12,000 plus churches who were routinely involved. You'd have to say they'd become less Christian. And I don't think that's going to work. And you'd have to ask, well, have they given up praying in the food bank, offering prayer? And I remember, this is an important illustration, talking to a food bank manager that we appointed to the Salisbury food bank, who said, well, I don't have a Christian faith, but I want to do this job. And I know prayer is important. So what I will do is to make sure that there's always somebody who can lead the prayers on every shift. And it'll be my job to make sure that there's somebody there and that it actually happens. So I think that's a really neat way of explaining how you manage the practicalities. The final thing to say about this question, which is, again, very important, the law of the land changed in 2010 with the Equality Act. And it was a good act, but it means every enterprise within the UK needs to follow the law. And that means that there are things that used to be more normative, practically done by Christian organizations prior to 2010, which no longer come up to the standard of non-discriminatory practice. And we go with that because there's some very good reasons for blocking out, locking out, and reducing any possibility of discrimination in entities like ours.
So what's changed, of course, from the time when the Trussell Trust started out, and even from the time when you went back to Bulgaria and got involved in poverty work there and across the wider Central and Eastern European region, and that is COVID. The last year has been extraordinary. What have been the particularly tough challenges for people at the bottom of the pile in the time of COVID, and what can those of us who want to see the world becoming a better place do about that?
Well, this takes us back to economy and society that is more capable of supporting its vulnerable members and is more capable of distributing wealth more equally. Because we know that poorer people are more likely to suffer the consequences of COVID, either directly because they're more exposed to getting the disease, or because they are the ones who had the jobs that are no longer there because they were, again, low paid in industries. They're the more disposable people, to put it rather crudely. Their children are the ones who are struggling hardest. I was talking to a friend who's a teacher last night who said, he's desperate. He's in charge of year 7 in a secondary school. He said, I'm exhausted and I'm desperate because I spend so much of my time dealing with the families of the children that I care most about, who are the least well off. And you've got 5 kids trying to fight over a mobile phone, and we're trying to get laptops to them so they can learn online. And then there's another one, and her mum can't read, so she can't help her child with and on it goes. We have to get in there and say, this is what's wrong. What can we do about it? And how can we prioritize that? Internationally, I have to say, where I've seen COVID hurt most is in countries like Moldova, Bulgaria, Serbia, because I see those countries, because the underpinning safety net that poor economies have is so little comparative to ours. Moldova is a country we're working increasingly in these days, and I chat with my friends there who we work with. They say, well, loads of people have been coming back because they lost their jobs in Italy and other places like that, but they don't come back to work because they can't, because there's no work. They haven't been seen for years, and they're turning up in the family and disrupting things, and they're getting sick. They're in our health in the hospitals. They haven't got the health insurance they had in Italy or in Germany, and so poverty means your experience is generally going to be worse than things aren't going well, and you're going to probably be last to benefit when they are going well. And what shifts the dial is committed people who have access to power saying, we got to do it differently. Let's try, and explaining why it's worth it in the long term.
Jesus, when asked about the poor, said, the poor you'll always have with you. And some people have taken that as a kind of negative comment that, well, what can you do? I don't think you have taken it that way.
No way. Looks like do we have an internet problem?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. There was a signal came up saying my internet had sort of done something naughty. I think it's like this. There will be always people who are suffering because of poverty and other things. And if we're going to follow what we're encouraged in Matthew 25 to do, which is to respond to the least of these, Lord, when did I see you hungry? When did I see you thirsty? When did I see you in prison or in hospital, sick, and come and visit you? When did I give you clothes, Lord? And the Lord says, when you did it to the least of these. So there's always new and fresh. But when you give somebody clothes, you visit them in hospital, you help make them better, you give them food. It isn't so that they come back tomorrow for more. It's because you want them to enjoy abundant life. So they move on. Someone else comes in and needs our help.
Chris, it's been a a privilege to spend the evening with you. We're very grateful to you for giving up your precious time to share some of those experiences. Some of us attend Christchurch Ewell, and we've got quite long associations with Moldova. So it's a delight to hear about what you're doing, and perhaps sometime in the future we can invite you back to hear more specifically about Moldova. But for now, I'd like to thank you very much for what you've done, and to hand back to Simon.
Yep.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you.
Okay, Norman, if you could just, thank you, spotlight me. Yeah, we're just very, very grateful to you, Chris, and to Norman for hosting that, and to all of you for attending this event and asking all those great questions. Yeah, Chris, along with those who helped him, strikes me as someone who didn't just talk about it, but actually went and did it. So it's been deeply challenging for us. I won't add anything, except I'd like to do a screen share at the very end. There are many other churches that I've not named tonight who are extremely keen on Foodbank, and I know there are Christians and non-Christians who help out and really have a heart to help people. But the sort of main reason I wanted to put this slide on was the top two websites. Obviously, Epsom and Ewell Foodbank, most of you would know that, and that's the place to go if you're from this area, if you'd like to volunteer. Whether it's sporadically or regularly. But I also thought it'd be good to put on the website where Chris now works, the Foundation for Social Change and Inclusion. So fscinet.org. It's just there in case anyone wanted to check it out. I did have a look at the website, and yeah, the strapline that I saw was preventing modern slavery and transforming lives in Southeast Europe. So huge issues in wealthy countries. I mean, I was very surprised when I moved to Epsom and Ewell. I always thought Epsom and Ewell was all, leafy green Surrey, all very well off. There's no food banks around here, surely not. No homeless people, surely not. But but I've been proven wrong. There are people that have these needs, particularly in these COVID days. So we're going to close the meeting now, but just thank you all again for being here, and thank you, Chris and Norman, for tonight. So bless you all, and thanks for tuning in.